Oh, hey there, neighbor. Mr. Whitehead here. You caught me at my old album liner notes again. Why don't you come a little closer and I'll tell you more about it? A little closer. Maybe a little closer. Okay, that's probably close enough then. This week, I want to talk about David Berman's final album, Purple Mountains. Technically, the band is called Purple Mountains, and this is their first self titled album, but it really is a solo project by David Berman, who was the driving force of the Silver Jews, an indie rock band that's been around since the late 90s. If you haven't been following the Silver Jews, David Berman is an outstanding poet. He actually has a book of poetry called American Water, which is critically acclaimed. But he's been writing music all along, and he is, I would say, for my generation, my second favorite lyricist, and I'll get to my first next, but it's hard to rank. He is just an amazing poet with words, and his music, in my opinion, is also severely underrated because of the kind of indie style that he embraced and not kind of being super polished. It gets overlooked a lot. This album was my favorite album of 2019. I was and still am really into this album. I'm still learning as I listen to it, even after hundreds of listens. I am still kind of finding new parts of songs that amaze me, and my favorite songs are still jumbling around on the album, which to me is always a good sign. And it really just means that every single song on this album is great. In my opinion, it is his best work of his career. And I really can't emphasize enough how good every song is on this album and how deep and meaningful everything is when you're listening to it, but also how really easy and great a listen it is. Um, Great artwork here. We have David Berman here on the back. The liner notes are really cool too. He does all of his own art here. A very indie rock aesthetic here and just approach to everything. He hand wrote out all the lyrics on the liner notes. So I don't know if you can see here, but he also has written out all of the chords for the songs. So you can learn them on your own and play them, which is super cool for me as a guitarist, and I think really gets to the kind of anti-rock star, just more populist view of David Berman and contemporaries like Pavement in the indie rock scene around the turn of the century. After that, indie rock kind of launched into the mainstream and changed a lot, in my opinion. But these guys really started lo-fi, and they actually started by recording songs into their friends' answering machines. And, back when people used answering machines in the late 90s. Um, as I said, it's hard for me to pick a favorite on this album. Every song is super meaningful, but if you wanted to start somewhere, Snow is Falling in Manhattan is one of my favorite songs ever. It does things to the listener lyrically that I've never seen any other songs do in terms of shifting perspective. It also, um, the music itself and the whole listening experience to that song, I am emotionally affected every time I hear it. It really, I get teared up, and it's somber tears, it's happy tears, it's angry tears, it's introspective tears. That's what this album does. It's kind of when you have those moments where you're overwhelmed kind of by life and the beauty and sadness of life all at the same time. He captures that all in this album. Um, there are some outside circumstances in his life, which his life has been very difficult and he struggled through a lot. And he is no longer with us. And so that can color this album as you're listening to it. But I urge you really to try to listen to it without that in mind. Um, and then obviously let it creep in, because I know for a lot of fans, they've been holding off on listening to this. A lot of friends that I've talked to, because it's so emotionally affecting. But it is really beautiful, and as I said, my favorite album of 2019. Um, it's tough for me to say anymore, just because I'm starting to feel that kind of sense of overwhelming wonder for the world and for this work of art, that the album brings me. And I really wish that we were getting more Purple Mountains and more David Berman. Even the title of the album and the band Purple Mountains kind of gives you a hint of his poetry and the beautiful way that he can see America and talk about America. So, other people to look into and artists, I had to mention John Prine really quickly. This is his first album. A lot of people know about him, but if you're going back or if you want a comparison, David Berman is like John Prine in that he doesn't sugarcoat things, but you're still going to see the beauty in life. John Prine has a lot of serious, weighty songs like Sam Stone, Hello in there. A lot of these songs deal with what can be very depressing or sad issues, but in a very human way. And both really through a lens of being an American and the complex feelings that they feel about being an American. So, John Prine's first album here. It's a good place to go to. Another place to go to would be Pavement, Slanted and Enchanted. So David Berman started playing with Steve Malkmus, and Steve Malkmus was actually playing guitar for the Silver Jews' first album. But they separated, and once Pavement lifted off, which is Steve Malkmus's among and the rest of the band's project. Pavement was the band that got kind of launched out of that Brooklyn indie rock scene out of the late 90s and is still enjoying some success from that. And this album, although it is more their first one and it is lo-fi, not recorded in a major studio, is a big reason why. So this is Slanted and Enchanted. Pavement, amazing rock group. And if you're missing kind of modern rock, start with Slanted and Enchanted, and you go to Crooked Rain after that. More recent, bringing it up to it, Steve Malkmus from last year has a solo project out called Traditional Techniques. He, similar to David Berman's, been playing along with an indie rock band since those early Pavement days, which is under the name Steve Malkmus and the Jicks. But here he stepped out on his own and has done 2 solo records, and this is the more recent one called Traditional Techniques. Again here, great songs from start to finish. A very acoustic album for him, and also an album that has a lot of Eastern influences when you hear it. I think a really different sound for Steve Malkmus, but in my opinion, this is his best work since Pavement. I do recommend the Jicks and some of his solo work up until then, but Traditional Techniques has been playing on my stereo a lot and is my favorite solo work of his since Pavement. Also, just wanted to show you, I was excited about this, being a fan of that whole scene, David Berman, Steve Malkmus, so I was excited for this album. Had heard a few tracks, and I pre-ordered the limited edition red vinyl version, which is a cool thing that you can do with vinyl. And it's not that much more. The trick is you have to know that the music is coming out, and you need to be on top of it enough to get that, limited edition. There's only, I think, 250 of these pressed, possibly more. But The colored vinyl can be really fun and is a cool kind of thing to have. So, Traditional Techniques by Stephen J. Malkmus, as it says here. Good place to start is Christian Man, which is spelled Xian Man here. If you're looking for a really strong album from Stephen Malkmus, great place to go to after Purple Mountains. And finally, I want to bring you to my favorite lyricist of my generation, Bill Callahan, or Smog. So Bill Callahan now goes under his own name. He started out under the name Smog, and this album, A River Ain't Too Much to Love, was his last album under the moniker Smog. He is a huge inspiration for me. Not only are his lyrics super affecting, very poetic, and just amazing, but he also musically is started out very experimental. If you listen to Smog stuff, very lo-fi, very DIY, which is something that is a current that runs through all of these artists that I appreciate. And it's harder to listen to some of his earlier stuff. This album, though, is not hard to listen to at all. I remember when I first heard it, and it felt like for the first time I had heard new folk music, and it's just the lyrics are super super interesting, and make you think all the time. And the album's mostly acoustic, but musically, I would say it's sparse, but at the same time, very, very full. Um, it's hard for me to pick a place to start here because I love every single song on this album. This is one of my favorite albums of all time. But I will say, Let Me See the Cults, In the Pines, I Feel Like the Mother of the World, Say Valley Maker, all of those are good places to start. But it's really an album where you're going to put it on and you're not going to stop playing it until it's done. So Smog, or Bill Callahan, he's also got some new albums out in the past year. And so great place to go to after Purple Mountains. When I'm listening to these albums, I feel like this is a friend playing their music in my living room for me alone. And that's a kind of sound and feel that you don't get from overly produced pop or big studio backed albums. It is really a very special feeling, and as a listener, to be grabbed by the lyrics and music of these great artists. And on that note, just a reminder that you are special, as these artists will make you feel. Your ears are special, they are unique, and that makes your listening important and special. Enjoy.